Alright, today we're going to be doing a practice stick for learning how to carve an eye. And this is a process that I've developed. I used to really worry about carving the face, as most of you probably do. And it was always a challenge going into the nose and the eye and everything, and wondering if you're going to mess up the rest of your carving. So over the years, I kind of looked at the different carving artists that are out there and seeing which technique I could use and sort of adapting some from each of them, and developed my own process that I use for all of my caricatures, and I also use it on some larger figures too, just kind of adapting as I go. But it's a process that lets me feel comfortable in carving the eye because I do it repeatedly and I know it's the way I'm going to go when I start the face. And it's kind of like a 12-step process, and this is what we're going to do as we go through the learning stick. We're going to start off here. This happens to be a square piece of stock. We're going to knock this edge off the stock, and the reason we're doing that is because we don't want the eye to be a point like this. The eye is going to have to round from side to side, and it rounds from top to bottom. But by knocking off this edge, it's going to help us give some roundness shape to this learning stick. Now, if I were doing a real carving on a caricature, I achieve that roundness in a different way. It's when I carve the nose and then go into the eye, I make that deeper at the inside corner, and then I can round that eyeball into the nose from the outside to the inside. Here we're just doing one eye, so we're going to get that roundness from the stick by knocking off that edge and rounding over. The next thing we're going to do is cut in this channel where the eye is going to go. Now, on a real caricature, this is going to be where let me get a bigger figure here. This is where I would have cut the channel for defining where the eye is going to go, a relationship to the bridge of the nose. So on this stick, we're going to cut that channel as the second step. It's going to be about 110 degrees or something like that. And as we cut this, for this larger eye that we're going to do, we're going to give a little bit of roundness to that upper cut that we make rather than just going straight in. And that's going to help us give some roundness to the upper part of the eyeball too. Next thing we're going to do is just mark in where our eye is going to be laying out. The eye is going to be 1/5 the width of the face. We're going to just make our own arbitrary size of the eye here because we're not doing a whole face. But then we're going to define the height of the eye as being about half the width of the eye. So once that's defined, we can lay that out. We'll draw this line in. We're going to extend that line on past the center cut of that wedge we took out, and we'll find out why later. Next thing we're going to do is take our knife, and with a straight end cut, we're going to make that trace of the pattern we just drew, come on down to the end of that cut, and we'll come back and take a sliver out above that, or right around that cut to help give the roundness to the eyeball. We'll then take 2 little triangle wedges out of each corner to help wrap the eyeball into the face. We'll then come in and define where the upper eyelid is going to be. We'll draw a line in, make a cut with our knife. We can take the rest of that little wedge out with a knife, a little sliver, or you can come in with a V-tool and take it out. We'll then come back and start doing some detailing on the eye, putting in a lower eyelid on the cheek part that we cut down here to help give the total roundness to the eye. We'll then define the eyebrow. We'll put in some crow's feet and add those details. And then if you're doing a natural carving, you may want to carve in the pupil and the iris, or if you're going to be a character carving and doing something small, typically those are painted in, and you don't have to worry about cutting them in because we'll just do all that with paint. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is take our stick, and we're just going to knock off the edge here, like I said, and that's going to give us that initial roundness to the eyeball. Nice pivoting cut with your knife, using your thumb as a fulcrum. Just slice those pieces away. Give yourself plenty of room to work. We're going to use it for an eyebrow and the different parts. So knock off a couple inches of stick there, giving that roundness to the eyeball from the inside to the outside. do this knife. You could do it with a gouge, whatever you feel comfortable with. Going with the grain like this, it's pretty easy to slice that off there with your knife. So I don't want a real round eyeball, but I don't want a flat eyeball either. So all right, that'll work fine. So we've now rounded off the corner of the stick, and this is going to be our eyeball, rounding from the outside to the inside. We'll go ahead and define this as being the outside of the eye and the inside of the eye with the nose over here. And we need to define that so we know how to lay out the shape of the eye. If you want to make yours a left-hand eye, or I guess it'd be a right-hand eye looking at the caricature, feel free to go ahead. So we've got that in there. We'll just pick a spot here, leaving some room above that, and that's going to be used for the upper part of the eye and for the eyebrow. So don't start your eye right here at the corner of the stick. Come down here a little bit and give yourself some room. We're now going to make that cut into the stick and start laying out the eye channel. And you can do this with your knife. You can do it with a V-tool, whichever way you want to take that wood away. You're going to want about 110 degree channel going through there. Part of that is going to be cheek on the bottom side, and then the upper part of this cut is going to be the upper part of the eyeball. So we're just guessing at the angle, I think somewhere around 110 degrees, a little bit more than a right angle would be good. Leaving a good bulk of material down here at the bottom, because we're going to use that for the cheek. Make this fairly wide so that you've got enough room to work. Depending on the size of your carving is going to depend on how wide you make this channel. But for practice, we're going to make it a little bit bigger than smaller, so that less prone to chip out, easier to work with, and demonstrate what we're doing. So like I said, you can do that with your V-tool, you can do it with your knife, leaving a little bit of roundness to those edges to simulate the face. Give yourself a fairly healthy distance here, because you're going to have an upper eyelid. Rounding up side to side. And rounding up that top just a little bit, so it's not just a perfectly straight cut. Like I said, that it's not that important on a very small caricature, because you'll never see that, and we'll add that roundness too. But if you're making a larger figure, then you want to try to get as much roundness as you can. All right, so right now we've developed this eye channel. We've kind of just brought this in. This is going to be the lower cheek. This is going to be the upper eye. And it's probably about 110 degrees. So we've got the roundness that's going to go from side to side on the eye, and we're starting to develop the roundness from the top to the bottom. All right, let's go ahead and sketch in where we're gonna, I'm gonna flatten this out just a little bit, where we're gonna sketch in the eye itself. What I'm doing, I had a little bit too much more roundness than I wanted on that lower eyelid, meaning I had an arch to it. If you're carving a smiling caricature or something like that, you may want more of an arch. Right now we're just going to go with pretty much a flat straight through there. All right, so I'm going to define how wide is my eye. Remember now I said we're doing a face that defines the width of the eye, because it's going to be 1/5 of the width. This is our practice eye. We can make it as big or as small as we want. We're going to do a fairly large eye. I'm just going to pick where the inside corner and the outside corner of the eye are going to go. That tells me the width. I know the height is going to be about half of that. It's not going to be a circular eye. You're only going to see a circular when you want a deer in the headlights type look, fear or something, that emotion. Most eyes are going to be about a half as high as they are wide and the shape of a football, with the peak about a third of the distance from one side to the other. So that's going to be our eyeball shape, kind of like a football. It's going to be as half as high as it is wide, and we extended this line past that center of the V cut that we made, and there's a reason for that later on that we'll explain. So we've now made that cut. So what we're going to do is, everybody got that? So now we're going to make a straight in cut with our knife, and that's going to define the inside of the upper eyelid. So it's just with my knife straight into the wood. I'm going to start here at this center point and follow it, making a fairly deep cut right on around, taking it on past the center line, clear out to the edge of that line that I marked on there before. So that was just a straight in cut using my thumb as a pivot, holding it there straight in, making that cut. That's all we did right there. So now what we have to do is take some of that wood out because we want to round that eyeball underneath the upper eyelid. If you're going to need a fairly good detail knife, but you'll just come in here and take out a small sliver of wood right along that line you just cut, rolling it back. Now we're going to stop that cut right here at this center line. We're not going to take that sliver all the way down to that cut we made, but right at that V, which is the start of our bottom eyelid, we're going to stop it. So you make that sliver above it, just taking out a small little sliver. Can you see that? So what I've done is just take out a sliver right through here down to that V cut, and that's going to help us shape that upper eyelid going in underneath. That V sliver that we cut out was just a little V cut right underneath here with the knife laying flat down on the eyeball, cutting up under that upper eyelid. All right. So now the lower eyelid is basically pretty flat. You can get really technical and put in your tear duct in the inside corner, but with most caricatures, you're not going to pick up that detail because everything is shrunken down so much. So the bottom line for the lower eyelid is basically going to be straight across. So using that bottom of the V as a guide, once again, I'm just going to take my knife, I'm going to go straight in. I'm going to start at that inside corner, make my cut, and just keep it a deep cut to that other point that I made out here for the outside corner. All right, now we're going to take some wood off the eyeball itself to give a little bit of depth to that lower eyelid. We don't need much, but we need some. So we're just going to take our knife, do some little peeling cuts. Now your eyeball is going to be higher on the top than it is on the bottom. It's going to slope from the top down to the bottom. The bottom is further in than the top. You pretty much got that when, when you cut that V in, so you've got the basic shape. But now you can start kind of rounding over, knocking off some of those sharp edges that you made when you made that uppercut, and go right into that lower part of the eyelid. So I'm just peeling off a little bit of wood right here to give some depth down below. If you get too much, we can always come back and take off some of the cheek down there and bring it back. Same time, I'm going to knock off those sharp edges that I had on the upper and round that in just a little bit. If you don't, I mean, you can leave it like a flat plane carving and leave all your sharp edges there, but if you're going to paint is not going to cover up those sharp edges. So if you want your eyeball to be smooth, you're going to have to do it with your carving. Paint won't do it. Okay, so what we've done now is we made that stop cut down here at the bottom. We peeled off a little wood from the upper eyelid. We knocked off some of the sharp corners, and we're starting to get some roundness to our eyeball. This is where we cut underneath here just to give us a little shadow for that lower eyelid. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we want to give a little additional roundness to the eyeball to take it back in on each side. And the way we do that is just take your knife and at that inner dot that we put in there for the eyelid, make a stop cut right there on that lower eyelid. You know, put your knife in there, make a stop cut on the upper eyelid, just driving that in, straight in. And we're going to come back, we're going to lay our knife pretty well flat on that eyeball, and we're just going to take out a small little wedge. Not a lot. If you take out a lot, it's going to make your eye look like it's popping out of the eye socket. So you don't want to drive it back in there a lot, but you do want to give a little bit of roundness to your eye going in there. Okay? We're going to do that on the outside. We're going to turn it around, do the very same thing on the inside. I'm going to lay my knife right there on the lower eyelid, make that stop cut, come up to the upper eyelid, put it in there, make that stop cut, lay my knife flat, pretty well flat against the edge. I got to raise it a little bit, but then just take out a little bit of wood right there in the corner. You can see just a little bit coming out, like a little chip carving. So now we've got a little bit of shadow as the eye goes in here, a little bit of shadow as the eye goes in there. Clean up that corner a little bit. Get rid of that pencil mark. At this time, if you want to round it up anymore, you know, get rid of those sharp points that you got on the eyeball. It's a good time to do that. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is, if you look at your eye, the eyelid on the outside edge, the upper eyelid comes down over your lower eyelid. When they meet at the center, they just come together. They don't overlap. But the reason we carved this extra depth out here, when we extended that upper eyelid down and made that cut, we're now going to take out a little bit of wedge here that will set that upper eyelid over the lower eyelid. So we're just going to come in here with our knife on this lower cheek, and I'm going to take out a wedge right in there. Take that wedge out right there. Slicing right up to that upper eyelid. See that wedge that we put in right in here. It's just a small shadow, but it puts that upper eyelid on top of the lower. Try to find something a little bigger here. This guy, you can see it pretty well. Now here I extended this upper eyelid down, and then I took that out so that you can see the upper eyelid. Coming on top of the lower. Okay, so now it's time to actually cut in the upper eyelid. So we'll kind of sketch in. Now, depending on the caricature and the facial features you want to do, that upper eyelid can change around, you know. I get up in the morning, my part of my eyelid is hanging down and it's not awake yet, so it covers up part of this eyeball down in here. By the time you get through the day, then your face wakes up a little bit and your upper eyelid can be defined a little bit more. We're going to go ahead and define this like this. You know, if you just got part of the eyelid being exposed here, you can do that. You can make your cuts. Look at the feature that you want to do and decide which way you're going to go. But this is going to be the way we put this one in. So that's going to be our upper eyelid. We've already got it started here, but you can see that there's usually a fold in your upper eyelid skin where there's another layer that goes in through here. All right, so you can use, once again, you can use your gouge, your knife, or whatever. We're going to start with a knife, same as we did before. We're going to make that cut straight in right here on that pencil mark that we did. Just make that cut. We're not going to go all the way down. We're going to stop above the center line where we drew. So now we've made that cut, and we want that to be pushed back in. So I'll come in here and I'll take off a sliver. To help roll that eyeball back into the head. See that sliver of wood coming out? All right, so that's helping give definition to that upper eyeball. Skin. So you kind of see that developing. So once I get that, I find it easier to go back in and start giving the roundness if I use the V tool. I can just kind of lay that V tool flat on its side and run it in that trough that I've created with my knife, taking a little bit more off that lower eyelid to flatten it out. It usually works better if you can start from the center and go out on both directions. You're less prone to splitting the wood out. Can you see that roundness being developed on that upper eyelid? We're pushing this skin further back into the head right there. So we came here and we went this way on it. Now I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to go from here to the outside corner using the same type of cut. Just keeping that V tool on the lower eyelid, trying to push that cut deeper back into the head, but at the same time round up that eyelid. Now I'm going to use my knife to kind of clean that up a little bit, give an even more of a shadow back in there. Take my knife, just run it right along there, pushing it back in, and then I'm going to take out a little wedge. Don't pry with your tip, but you can pull out those little pieces anyway. Come in here and just finesse it a little bit. See what you like. Okay, so now we've got the eyeball in here, we've got this upper eyelid, and we've got some depth going back in there to show roundness of the eyeball going back in. So the next thing we're going to do, I just opened that up a little bit wider, giving even more depth to that upper eyelid. So we've got pretty good depth going in here now. We've got some definite roundness to the eye being pushed back into the head. So at this point, next thing we're going to do is define some eyebrows on the individual. So the eyebrows are going to be right along this ridge here. If you don't want a lot of eyebrow, that's fine. If you want to emphasize the eyebrow so that it is a dominant, and a lot of times on caricatures you'll make big bushy eyebrows on your Santa Claus or your wood spirits or anything like that. So the way we can emphasize that is, right now this is all straight. We can come back in here and do a cut along the brow up in here, and that will push out some of that wood so that we get a little bit more emphasis on the eyebrow. You can just take your gouge if I'm going to say that I've got an eyebrow that's kind of bushy and big up here like this, and I want to emphasize that, I'll just come in here with my gouge and take some of this wood off above it. And that will go right into my forehead. Get that defined, then I would then slope that right into the forehead. But it just helps bring out the eyebrow a little bit more. So what we did here was just come in and relieve a little bit of wood above it. That gave us a much bushier eyebrow. Like I said, if you don't want that, you can really just leave the wood like it was, slope this back into the forehead, come in here and texture and paint, and it works out well. So at this point, this is going to be the inside of our eyeball. This is the outside. If your caricature or figure is smiling, a lot of times you're going to have the crow's feet And so you can bring in the crow's feet out here at the corner of the eye. Whenever you do that, recommend an odd number of crow feet. Odd numbers just seem to go better than even numbers. Whether it's clouds in the sky or whatever you're working on. You can just take your V tool and come in here and make your crow's feet to help emphasize. Maybe your eye is smiling and you got a little bit of cheek coming up there. Now, we need to detail a little bit more down here for the lower eyelid, because right now we've got all this cheek material that comes in here, and we need to waste away some of that. So it's good to leave it. We're going to take a little bit of it away now that we know how much we need. So we're just going to waste away a little bit of this cheek. Not going all the way up to the eye yet. I just want to get rid of some of this material out here. Because what we want to do is now we're going to come in here and we're going to take out some of that cheek material to help establish this lower eyelid. So I want a lower eyelid in here. I'm just going to kind of say, it's going to be something like that. I can take a V-tool or a small gouge and come back in and say I want that roundness in there. Maybe you want to put some bags under the eye for this individual. Yeah, we're just cutting away some of this cheek, leaving that eyeball material in there. That's going to get an indication that we've got a roundness going into there. Smooth that up just a little bit. So now we've got a lower eyelid with a little bit of a bag going down in here. So what we're going to do now is kind of just finish up that cheek. I mean, we're going to have to blend it all in. And I want to put in just a few more wrinkles in the cheek, but I'll smooth out that trough that I cut for the eyelid, lower eyelid there. Maybe setting that upper eyelid a little bit deeper out here as I go underneath the cheek, just to keep that shadow going as I take out some of that other material. So now, if you want to put a little more caricature, I mean, if you're doing a wood spirit or something like that, you probably typically come in, put a few lines or wrinkles. They're not smooth skin, they're not a beauty right in here. They've developed some caricature over the age, and so just look at some wrinkle lines, you know, intersect a couple of them. So might show that he's got a little twinkle in his eye. If he's smiling, or some of the skin out here is kind of wrinkling up a little bit. Then of course this would be removed further if I'm doing a real face. As it blends into the nose, you know, it's going to be pushed back. All this material would be pushed back as in a real face, and that would be developed into a cheek, mustache, the rest of the face, whatever you're doing. Now the other thing we need to do is come up here and put in some eyebrows on corner. I'm going to just carve off these pencil lines. Easier to do now than later. Think about your eyebrows. Whenever I teach a class and I ask the students, I go, okay, so without looking at your neighbor, tell me which way your eyebrows go. And you'd be surprised how many times they're just backwards of the way they're going to go. So keep in mind which way your eye is, whether you got a left eye or a right eye, and which way the eyebrows are going to go. So we've defined this to be the inside of the eye, the outside of the eye. So eyebrows are going to go like this. So they're flaring out like this, and as we come around, they're going to start to straighten out a little bit, but they're going to go down. But important thing is that they go like this and not like this. They don't flow toward the inside of your head, they go the other way. So when you start carving those in, it's kind of carver's choice. You can put in a lot of detail. You may make them as rugged as you want or as delicate as you want. But we're just starting to carve in some texture for the hair that's going through there. As coming around on the outside edge, laying them a little bit flatter. So they're coming up here and they're going flatter as we go. Taking off a little bit of wood above it just to bring that eyebrow out a little bit more. And once again, this would be going in, your nose would be starting right in here. You'd have kind of a trough that goes up into your forehead and blends in with the other eye. So that pretty much gets you to where you're going. Now if you're going to paint, this is where you would come in, and paint the eyeball and do all that. If you're going to leave it natural and you want to cut in a pupil, and an iris and a pupil, you can sketch those in. One thing that is recommended is you try not to make your caricature look straight at you. You try to make them off at a little bit of an angle. If you look straight at you, chances are you're not going to get them exactly parallel, and it's either going to look cross-eyed or that they're looking out goofy. So just a little bit off to the side works better. So when you sketch in or you cut in your iris and your pupil, it's not going to be a circle again. It's going to be kind of a semicircle, because your pupil, unless you're doing, like I said, the deer in the headlights look, is not totally exposed. You're only seeing part of it. It's covered up by the upper and the lower eyelid. So you can sketch in what you want for a pupil and an iris. Most of the time you don't get both whenever you're doing the carving. You're only going to do one and then take it out. So I've got those two in. You can come in with a gouge, or you can just come in with your knife, make that little semicircular cut, top to bottom, trying not to cut into your eyelids. Take out a little sliver of wood to give you a shadow. Round it up a little bit. And that will give you your finished eye. Now a lot of times you look at statues, and at that time you may see the whole iris removed. It's not a big deal. You can just come in with your gouge, make that stop cut, come in with your knife on the upper eyelid, and pop off those pieces. And that too will give you some depth. And when you stain that, put a finish on it, since that's kind of cross-grained, that's going to stain darker and give a little bit more prominence to it at that point. You got the depth here so that the inside of the eye cannot be seen when you look at it from the side, because we rounded that stick, and that's where you're going to round everything when you do your facial features. We got roundness from the top to the bottom, so the top of the eye is farther out than the bottom of the eye. Eye is about half as wide as it is, half as tall as it is wide, and you got all the features.